Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, Life Beyond Religious Trauma. Faith and religion can be a consoling, supportive experience for lots of people. But for me, it was pure hell. From the time I was around 4 years old till later in my teens, I was sexually abused by Catholic priests and others in the Worcester Diocese and surrounding Diocese of Massachusetts. I was used in a child sex porn ring that produced videos here and abroad. Please join me as I share my healing journey from religious trauma through reimagining my faith, as well as inspiring insight from interfaith into spiritual experiences. Listen to the wisdom provided by other survivors, therapists, and spiritual guides, and others in thoughtful and provocative conversations. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, and please share it with others who you may feel might benefit from it. Hi, I'm Jessica McGuire. Welcome to my first podcast of Life Beyond Religious Trauma. We are here today with Dr. Russ Surveyor, who's my therapist because I have been abused by the church in a spiritual way, very dramatically, which is I'm a clergy abuse survivor of the Catholic Church. And also my very close friend, Dr. Father Carl Chudy. We will begin.
It's really been a privilege and pleasure to work with Jessica McGuire. And, you know, she said she was spiritually abused. I would like to say that she was spiritually, psychologically, and physically abused by religious men and women in a context that should have been a safe place, but was not.
Hi, I'm Father Carl Chudy, and I am a close friend and spiritual guide for Jessica McGuire. And I've been working with Jessica for about the last a little over 6 years, together with her therapist, Russ. And together we're traveling on this healing journey with Jessica in these last 6 years. And in particular, the healing that's been going on in this last year are the kind of healings that Jessica would like to share with you all.
So when I was 4 years old, 5, I started getting flashes of being held down. Images that haunted me, the fear of being downstairs, the fear of stairs. And then eventually it went to my grandmother had close friends, which was part of her friend group. And some of them were religious, and they brought me downstairs, which I had a fear of being downstairs because they were men. I was hiding under tables, and I was lightly groomed and tickled. And then I had the images started to getting stronger as this 6-year healing process began. So as the layers go up and down, maybe you can explain better, Russ.
So you see, this is exactly the way recovery works. Although it's fascinating that it happened at age 4 or 5 for Jess, but often it happens much later in life when something will bring up, something will trigger a memory of the past and it comes forward. And the challenge is for the person to allow themselves to see, feel, and experience whatever it is that is coming up, because that's how the psyche heals itself from these wounds. When the wounds originally happen, the person is overwhelmed and they can't protect themselves, And so the psyche simply records this, and as Richard Schwartz says, makes this part an exile, tries to push it out of consciousness altogether. But later on in life, what will happen is things will bring back these pieces. And that's an opportunity. Every time it's an opportunity to do a piece of work on something that happened years before.
My grandmother was highly religious, and she babysat me a lot even further on. That's how I got to spend a lot of one-on-one time later on in life with my grandmother, as I will relate in the future. But she also worked with a deacon that ended up being part of my parish later on too, which is also crucially important. But the biggest part of it was that she knew religious people. She was highly religious and knew a lot of people. She knew someone who knew other people who were at the shrine. And these people were different kind of people. They were people that, like I said, lightly touched. So the lightly touching ran into more get-togethers, can't get-togethers, Bible lessons at the shrine in the area, which led into introduction to more of these people who started training me in the tactics. Like, I was disobeying my parents. They were very angry with me. I let in the fear of anger, God's punishment, how it could be. They considered me very demonic, and it just went further on to the point where I was introduced to a few others by my grandmother's connections.
And what we see here is often what happens. You can sense Jessica's innocence, and you can sense how she was drawn into something that she had no idea what she was getting herself into. And she was led into these things by people who were purporting to teach her something or something of that nature. What's really difficult here is there's a combination of spiritual blaming going on here, accusing her of being evil, accusing her of being demonic, or something like that, which had nothing to do with who she really was. But these were the ways in which spirituality was twisted, and in using her and grooming her toward sexual abuse.
A little more than 6 years ago, I began as the spiritual guide for Jessica. And I found that in her experience of all of these things that were happened to her, that she was engendered with this extraordinarily distorted and negative image of God in her life. And that at the center of it was the fact that she was sinful, that she was evil, and that she needed to be purified. So a lot of what I was attempting to do in the beginning with Jess, and as we worked together, was to find ways to reimagine God in all of this, to reimagine not only God, who is an image of kindness and goodness and life and engendering beauty, but the fact that she too, because of that, has been gifted with this same gift, which was something very difficult for Jess to accept, that she was loved by God, that she's forgiven, that she is somehow she is filled with goodness, and what we often call together her original blessing that God gave her when she was first created.
Speaking about what Father Carl was talking about, one of the really astonishing things for me as Jessica's therapist was when I realized that as she was being abused, she was also witnessing other people being abused, and that she had deep compassion for what was happening to them. So here was a young girl who was in pain herself, and yet she was big enough, large enough, a soul, so that she actually could feel other people's pain and have compassion for it.
So slowly after age 4 to 6, I started going to my grandmother's friend's shrine, where I was introduced to other men, which is slowly introduced to camps, where it actually over a period of from 6 to 10 magnified into the most horrific experience that I would not want even those poor boys I witnessed or myself to witness. A lot of ritual sacrificing, a lot of misuse of scripture, misuse of the devotions, etc., etc. And it took a lot of time to forgive. And I see with others, it's going to take a lot of time to forgive because there is so many layers to this.
So, as Jessica was saying, that they began using spiritual things, for example, the confessional, or the altar, or the Eucharist, and they were using these very powerful symbols as excuses for sexual activity, inappropriate sexual activity with her, and they were justifying what they were doing by claiming that she was sinful and needed to be corrected and needed to be healed, and that somehow what they were doing to her, the sexual abuses they were doing to her, was part of a what from their point of view was part of a spiritual healing process. None of that was spiritual. None of that was psychologically healthy. None of that was appropriate.
As her spiritual director at that time, one of the things I wanted to do in light of this experience of Jess and what Dr. Russ had mentioned is to provide positive experience of sacramental signs, religious symbols, and not just the symbols themselves, but for her to encounter it with me. So that when she encountered these sacraments, she countered them in a more authentic, more life-giving way. To understand the sacrament of confession instead as a center of abuse for her and memories and flashbacks that are terrible, to understand the sacrament of confession in a life-giving way where she was actually released through the power and wonder of Christ from all the things that have tormented her. And so confession, and in particular Eucharist, was something Jess and I focused in a lot. And we spoke together about it before to our local parish, about how the Eucharist had become a symbol of healing for her in this whole experience as she was continuing on her healing journey. It's heartbreaking, of course, to see the sacraments of the church that have been so precious for so many people to be so utterly and dastardly distorted. And in many ways, we were trying to counteract these things with Jess. But Jess, of course, because these things were happening since she was very young, were images that were very difficult to accept, and in some cases still is. Her being able to accept that the Eucharist is life-giving, that Jesus really does forgive her, that she is worth forgiving in the first place, is something she struggles with to this very day.
of 10 to maybe 11, the abuse magnified to my parish because the deacon also was in charge of the parish, like I said, to the point where I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't get away from it in my church. I couldn't get away from it anywhere. But the biggest thing of even today, I feel worthless. I don't sense God versus I'm feeling too much. I'm feeling too much rejection. I think as I'm seeing the layers of how lives can intertwine when we have a connection to someone or care about someone, where we do not know how to deal with the anger and the rage on something like this. And even the simple mistakes can be used as ways to grow, change, magnify, and change into layers of strength from the suffering that we have, not the suffering that we give to one another. In other words, we don't have to beat ourselves up, feel like we're doing something wrong. Have a little faith.
Yes, and what Jessica just said, you can see the negative impact of all the messages that were sent to her. That it's hard for her not to see herself being at fault, and it's hard for her to not be triggered by daily events that are in her life that are not her fault, but she feels like they are her fault because in so many ways she was blamed for things that she did not cause.
So over this past year of learning, I learned that there are many layers to healing. And as we get re-triggered and hurt, there are ways that will make us stronger and more powerful to trust more, to love more, to care for one another in ways that we get stronger so we can face this healing process in ways like never before. This is all we have for this episode, but in our next episode, we can go through the layers of getting stronger through the sense of letting go of the feelings and going with more of how we can make a huge difference in ways like never before.